Greetings. My name is Cameron Miller, and this is Trinity Place in Geneva, New York. Welcome. Soren Kierkegaard made the observation about the sort of ordinary human insanity that we could only understand life backwards, but we could only live life going forward. Likewise, we declare and grant yes and no to so many life-altering events and decisions without blinking an eye, never knowing ahead of time what we have assented to or denied, and most of the time never knowing the implications of our having said no. The reading today, all the readings rather, take us down that rabbit hole and lead us along a very twisted path. And I'm going to do the same thing. So let's go back to the beginning of another century. The turn of the 20th century, just for some perspective. In 1900, a massive hurricane swallowed Galveston, Texas, whole, killing 8,000 people. In 1901, President Kennedy was assassinated in Buffalo, New York. In 1902, a volcanic eruption on the island of Martinique killed 38,000 people in a moment. In 1906, San Francisco had its famous earthquake and fire, killing 3,000. That same year, an earthquake in Colombia killed another 1,000. Still, in 1906, an earthquake in Valparaiso, Chile, killed 20,000. The bookend of that half-decade of devastation was a famine in China during which 20 million people died in 1 year. We could add to this woe by mentioning travails in Africa, Australia, the Middle East, and Siberia in those few years of the very new 20th century. But one crucial difference between then and now is that now there is a sandstorm of information about every and all disasters, wars, genocides, economic meltdowns, and even the death of unnamed individuals who died from noteworthy causes 2 continents away. You and I are standing in the middle of what might be the collapse of U.S. capitalism, and at the same time, we are inundated with horrendous details about god-awful fires, hurricanes, autocrats poisoning or chopping up members of their opposition, the North Korean nuclear program, global warming witnessed one chunk of ice at a time, and a global pandemic that has revealed the astounding negligence and incompetence of the current federal leadership. We are drenched with disasters in great detail, whether or not we experience them personally and whether or not we can exert any personal influence upon solving them or caring for the victims in their wake. Now add to that gruesome storm of devastation, threat, and calamity any personal trauma, crisis, or grief, and our perspective on the world and on life itself, on our own circumstances, can get utterly distorted. In fact, even if everything is going really well for us personally, and all that information about things utterly beyond our control can change our perception dramatically. And we ought to know by now that perception is reality. In other words, how we perceive things, whether we are accurate in our perceptions or not, shapes our actions and our responses. So, in a moment like this one, when institutions we have come to depend upon are cracking, if not collapsing. And the vault of our trust in elected officials is more bankrupt than Pier 1 and J.C. Penney. And the strange disconnect between the economic realities and the stock market feels like thin ice. We have less certainty than ever about what to say yes or what to say no to. It's a good time then to take a step back. In times like these, we need to step back and to name what is important to us. We need to step back and name who is important to us. We need to step back and name who and what we have in our lives for which we are most grateful. We need to step back and name who and what we need in order to reach out and hold on to others and to allow them to hold on to us. It's in times like these we need to step back from the fury of information that's raining down on us like acid and filter it out so that we can see our own situation more clearly. We need to be like a dancer, affixing her gaze so that she can retain her balance while she goes spinning on her toes. We likewise need to affix our gaze on a single point, on a single point that we trust, on a single point who we love, on a single point that we know is more solid than anything else we know. Now, I won't tell you there is only one single point in the vast array of spiritual wisdom upon which we can affix our own gaze. Our tradition has multiple points and a long history of guides, mystics, and teachers who offered different tethers in a storm that worked differently for different people. Abraham and Sarah, Moses and the Exodus, Ruth and Naomi, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Micah, the parables and the teachings of Rabbi Jesus, the mystical resurrected Christ, the wisdom of Paul, the female and male mystics of the 13th, 14th, and 15th centuries, the social prophetic martyrs of the 20th century. In one sense, they're all part of one big giant pier upon which to tether ourselves in turbulent times. But it's too big to hold the whole thing, and so we must choose a piece of it for ourselves. We can wrap ourselves even around just a solid branch of the giant tree that is most familiar, most comforting, most solid for us in this moment. Knowing that you surely have your own tether or your own focus point in the tumultuous and painful times, I'm going to share where my gaze is affixed right now. Or to put it in terms of the readings, where my yes is declared and tethered. And for me personally, the point onto which I affix my gaze in this moment is trust. Trust. Trust that no matter what, it'll be okay because of God. Now, I don't mean magical thinking in the sense that because of God, nobody gets hurt and everything turns out like Disney in the end. I mean that because of God, whatever happens, whether or not I survive or those I love survive, it will be okay because I trust God is both merciful and loving. I trust God to be God and therefore whatever happens will be grace. What that really means is that I am able to grab hold of a perspective that is not really about me and not really about those I love. Rather, it is a perspective about something much bigger and much greater than myself. To trust God to be God is to gain the perspective that it's not about me or mine, or the nation or the church I belong to. To trust God to be God is to gain the perspective that it is about so much more than I can see at any given moment, nor will I ever have perspective enough to judge the final outcome. To trust God to be God is to keep my vision affixed on my core knowledge about God and to hold on to it with determination and faith rather than with fear and anxiety. To trust God to be God allows me to reach out and hold the hands of people who I see reaching out to me, and then also allows me to allow them to hold me. Trusting God to be God means strengthening our connection to others in community at the very moment that our knee-jerk reaction is to recoil and pull away and nurse on our hurt and our fear and in isolation. Now, I mention all this not only because of the disintegration of the financial system and the fires and the need for face masks and people who refuse to wear face masks and any or all of that, but because of that parable in Matthew. It is an image of the tether to which I affix my gaze in difficult times. God is like that generous employer in the parable who gives everyone the same pay regardless of when they began working. That pretty much preaches itself, doesn't it? That parable is great news for everyone except those who may have been working all day. It's great news for everyone except those who nurse on resentments when someone gets more than they do. There is something in that parable that is very much like the story of the father whose generous love and embrace for his very derelict boy fills the oldest and dutiful son with nothing but bitterness. There's something in this parable very much like that story from Jonah, who complains angrily to God that the whole reason he ran away in the first place was because he just knew that if he really went and warned Nineveh to clean it up, that God was going to grant them leniency in the end. It just burned Jonah up that late in the game, God was going to be merciful instead of stingy with a kind of justice that would punish them for not being good enough. Jonah's was a resentment that revealed his deeply self-centered perspective. And it's just not that difficult to identify with Jonah, nor with the prodigal's older brother, or those who worked in the field all day for the same pay. Every one of us has sucked on that kind of toxin before. Every one of us knows the bitterness of that bile. Every one of us knows the perverse pleasure of nursing a resentment years and years and years after the perceived offense. But resentment, bitterness, they're not the primary disease. They're only symptoms. The primary disease is a gaze that is affixed to the self. The primary disease is being fatally rooted in me and my own. The primary dis-ease is a self-orbit that knows no higher ground. These parables and stories, they consistently come at us out of our tradition. They push our gaze upward and outward. They push us to see to a perspective that is bigger and greater than ourselves. Now, that does not mean we don't matter. That does not mean our needs are unimportant. It does not mean that our losses and our pain are not grievous and debilitating. They are. But rather it means we are a small part of a much bigger story. And our meaning, the meaning of our lives, is derived not from our little part in the story, but from the story itself. Get it? The rock-solid meaning to which we need to tether our lives, to tether our hope, to tether ourselves, is the meaning of the story, not our little part in it. It's the meaning of the story, not our little part. When we can affix our gaze at difficult and painful moments on our trust that the kingdom of God and this life that we're living is part of a bigger and more meaningful story than our own self-interest, then we find ourselves able to unclench our jaw. So, I don't really know what all this means for the long-term health or decline of American capitalism, or global warming, or this fight for the soul of our nation. But I do know, and I comprehend it much better when I hold on to trust in God. It helps me to unclench my jaw, to loosen my grip on the rope and start reaching out to hold your hand, and sometimes then to even allow you to hold mine. Well, thank you for listening. I do appreciate it, and I do appreciate you being part of this community across time and space, wherever you are and whoever you are. Thanks for being part of it. And most of all, this day, the next, and the next, the peace of the Lord be always with you.